I think we're live.
What was I frozen just to start this off?
Yeah.
Are we live? All right, great.
Solid start.
What's up, everybody? Yeah, great start. I refreshed a tab and it knocked out my whole computer. Anyways, my name is Max Cohen. Welcome to the MOCA Live podcast. We're so happy to have you here at 5:01 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on a Wednesday in what is looking to be a gray and rainy couple of days here in Brooklyn, New York. I am sick, and that is Colborn to my right. He's the founder of the Museum of Crypto Art. He's my co-host as always. Colborn, how are we finding you?
I am also sick, but in a very different way than you.
Well, honestly, I feel like we've just switched shoes because usually I'm the one who's sick in the head and you're the one who's physically going through an ailment. I am all hopped up on Dayquil and Advil and all sorts of medicine designed to unclog my sinuses and get my voice to the sterling monotone that it usually presents itself as. So apologies in advance for any coughs or hiccups that may come about. So today on the podcast, we have kind of no choice but to talk about economics, because I think that the last 5 days of global economics was probably the most, I don't know, maybe virulent is the right word, the most virulent embodiment of recent market sentiments in quite a while. And I feel like we do this every 6 months or so anyways, this what the fuck is happening in the global markets episode. This time, however, I feel like there is more of a direct effect that whatever is going on in global economics is going to have on crypto. And I want to talk about that. I want to talk about how perhaps crypto is already angling itself to have internalized and also reflect global economics. We're going to talk about free mints. We're going to talk about all sorts of things. But I want to start out with just a provocative question for you, Colborn, which is, well, let's start here. Do you think it's worth going into what was kind of going on with the global markets over the last 5 days or so? Or can we do you think it's kind of assumed we can just
do you want to talk about the carry trade?
Yeah, why don't we just go quickly over the carry trade, just so we can get something down on paper, and then we can go from there.
Yeah, do you want to hit that, or should I hit that?
You seem like you're in the better position.
Okay, I mean, I think the ELI 5 is basically, there were people with a bunch of money out there looking for cheap financing, and they were using it in yen denominated currency, and suddenly, I guess, I'm actually not going to be the right person to explain this because I really didn't care about it too much. But what happened basically was that the yen strengthened and everybody's peg kind of broke, and collateral was washed and everybody was underwater on these trades, so they had to go into other assets to sell to kind of cover.
That was a great explanation. Yeah, I pretty much understand it the same. A lot of people were betting on the yen to not have high interest rates, and the interest rates went up, and a bunch of things just untangled from there. Yeah. On top of that, you had further conflict in the Middle East. The U.S. sent a whole carrier fleet to the Middle East. Iran is, they've threatened war with Israel, so not awesome situation there. A U.S. jobs report came out, I believe it was Thursday or Friday, that was lower than expected. So low, in fact, that it might actually signal the beginning of a recession. And all of these things at once sent the markets, global markets, into an absolute free fall on Friday. The NASDAQ and the S&P and the Sekai 225, which is Japan's largest stock market, had their worst days ever. And then everything bounced back on Monday. And now we're kind of in this weird up and down sentiment period where every day's up and then the next day is down. Either way, the reason I think it bears talking about, because all of these things I'm conceptualizing as pretty sticky. These are not bad sentiment and then everything goes away. These are like things that might affect markets for quite a while in some pretty negative ways. So now on to the provocative question that I wanted to ask you, Colborn. Is the bull market over? The bull market.
Well, here's the thing about this, right? If the economy is collapsing, first of all, it doesn't feel like it is, right? This is not 2008. This is not credit default swaps blowing up and overpriced housing market. This is pretty seemingly localized contagion among some hedge funds that were using this for cheap financing. It didn't move tremendously, so it just seems like over time this is being, or it will be unwound, and it will be unwound at these lower valuations. But it was a massive flight to cash, sell everything and get out. There was an immediate rebound afterwards, but it's this is like the threading the needle with a smaller and smaller hole that these central banks are forcing themselves into, right? So Japan owns something like 120% of the stock market, right? There's like no real economic growth happening in Japan. No population growth. There's no expectation that this economy, which has been pretty much like a zombie economy for a while, is ever going to kind of turn the corner. So the central bank's policy in order to get out of this is always going to be quantitative easing, right? They are always going to buy their own assets and put more money into the market, which drives inflation, which if Bitcoin is the scarcest asset in the world, we should see significant price increases.
I'm going to take the other side of that coin. Conceptually, I think I have a bit of a bleaker outlook on things, only because I think that the most important part of this whole kind of like three-headed monster of economic conditions was the like looming recession fears in the US. I don't have the exact like definition and figures, but there is this model used to determine a coming recession called the Sams rule, named after an economist named Claudia Sams. And it has something to do with the amount of job growth compared to like the previous year's job growth. But basically like an event was triggered over 3 months that almost always leads to a recession. And so I'm thinking like, okay, well, what happens if the US goes into a recession, even if it's a light recession? Well, we know that Bitcoin and Ethereum, and thus the entire crypto market, is now really, really tied to these large institutional actors operating out of the US, the BlackRocks, the Grayscales, etc. So if there's a US economic downturn, that is going to drag the price of everything down, especially more volatile, riskier assets like a Bitcoin, like an Ethereum, than altcoins from there, just because of how entangled those things are. Like in a perfect world, these things aren't correlated. Like Bitcoin and the stock market are not fluctuating at the same time, but at least over the last 5 days, that's exactly what seemed to happen. They were pretty much rising and falling in lockstep with each other. Either way, are there like similarities, I suppose, that you notice between like what is happening right now and say the more crypto specific like economic downturns of like 2018 and like early 2022? Or is this now kind of a new, in your opinion, like a new situation altogether?
I mean, it is downright frightening to see Ethereum down 30% in the past week.
Yeah.
That is different. I do remember days this volatile in the past. But because of what you're saying, right? Because of all the institutional interest, because of kind of like the higher prices you expect over time, that the volatility in these assets dampens. Now, volatility in and of itself isn't necessarily a bad thing, because generally, as quickly as it can go down, and then it can shoot back up, right? Mm-hmm. Where these crypto assets, get really boring is when they kind of just chop for a while. So, volatility in and of itself isn't necessarily bad, but down 30% in a week is certainly different.
Sure. Well, I'm glad you brought up this idea of like the boring situation, right? The small ups and downs, this wave of chop, because it seems like this is kind of where we've been like farting around for quite a while. And this like, it's a bear market, but it's wearing like bull market clothes, so to speak, kind of situation where like prices are up, but the sentiment, especially like as we go further down the funnel towards like NFTs and then crypto art, has been pretty stagnant, right? And within the stagnation, we've seen all these platforms close. See Known Origin close and Polygonal Mind close and Async and JPEG. And I don't know what Foundation is doing with Rodeo, which is their new platform, but that also seems like a cry for help. All of that aside, this is a shakeup in some way, shape, or form. And at least we're moving towards, it seems like, a shakeup to the positive or the negative, right? Whether you want to say that things are going to go down because of recession fears, whether you want to say that things are going to go up because Bitcoin is a hedge against inflation, whether we're all just on this chop until, the effect of the halvening, the Bitcoin halvening in April kind of kicks in some 6 to 9 months after the fact. I guess the question is there a positive lining to what happened over the last couple of days, just in the sense that things are going to be shaken up out of its choppy stagnation?
Was there a question there? I'm sorry.
Yeah, my bad. Yeah, I guess like more or less, like, do you think that even in a broad economic downturn, or like an economic downturn of the likes that we saw in the last couple of days, if it can continue or the trend continues, is there a positive lining to be drawn from that? Like, is there a positive line to draw from increased volatility?
Is there a positive? I mean, you cannot have significant change without significant shakeup, right? And the world is really yearning for it. I don't, where do you see the world in 3 to 5 years? My outlook, unfortunately, is like really bleak. We're kind of pigeonholing ourselves in things that we've talked about before, and there really is no answer to what people are going to do once AI and technology eats the world, right? And I know you've been more positive than I have in the past about this, but we are exponentially racing up like the curve to almost replace ourselves.
Well, that's a really interesting point, especially now, because I feel like most of the mainstream attention on AI that I see in the last couple of weeks is talking about it as a bubble, like it's overinvested, it's not making money, etc. Like, do you not feel that same kind of trepidation that there is some like large bubble to burst coming, and that we are on just an exponential curve?
It's 80% of all US dollars have been printed since 2022. I say that with confidence. I don't know if it's really true, but I think it's true.
Sure.
I'm telling you, like the threading the needle on the hole, and the hole is getting like this big, and something will have to give. It feels, don't we feel pretty far deep down the post-capitalist rabbit hole? My whole thing about like, there is inherently an absurdity to like selling JPEGs online. And I think that is what and why it's so quickly piqued the world's imagination. But the internet is dying. All the models that we know aren't really working. And, I think a lot of people are trying to make sense of what this new world looks like in the face of being like totally thrown into obsolescence.
So I think that this is like the subtext of a lot of the podcasts we've done recently. We spent a couple of weeks talking about business models in crypto art specifically, to no real avail, right? We didn't come to any kind of we didn't figure out the business model for crypto art. We haven't figured out a business model for the metaverse, right?
I mean, Snapchat hasn't figured out a business model. Uber hasn't figured out a business model. Like, WeWork historically failed. Tell me, other than, McDonald's for the first time in forever had declining sales. Tell me what is working.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really fair point. I've been talking with friends a lot about how coming of like adult age in the 2010s with all of these investor subsidized apps, whether it was rideshare apps or delivery apps or streaming services, was like a golden period that we could not have appreciated at the time. That
Yeah.
because all of these apps were basically, and the investors in these apps were just prioritizing growth over revenue, they were just pouring money in a funnel down these companies' throats. And then we as consumers were benefiting. And that's why, now if you want to get a burrito delivered, it's going to be $30 and not $10. That's why if you want to get a streaming service, you're either paying $15 for something with ads, which is no better than the cable bundles which came before, or you're paying exorbitant amounts for the same experience you had for pennies on the dollar, 10 years ago. So I think that's a good point. I do want to just take this and like hone into crypto art, because I think that unlike a lot of these, like, crypto art is at its core not necessarily a financially incentivized ecosystem, right? An art movement does not require financial incentivization to exist, especially an art movement, which,
I mean, but maybe a modern art movement does, right? And maybe that's like the whole thing of why it worked.
well, I would just push back, and I would love your opinion on this. Like everyone from you to Eleanor Brizzi, who we had on a couple weeks ago, all the OG artists I talked to, everyone idealizes this period, the 2017 to 2020 period before money became involved in crypto art. And it seemed like it was working super fine then, before there was really an economic incentive to begin with.
Yeah, but there was also, my thing with it is that there's just beauty in the paradox of the fact that the early art, for the most part, like wasn't that good, and that there's something more human about that before like all of the good artists were called because everybody thought they could make $1 here.
Do you really think that the art? Yeah, sorry, please.
No, go ahead.
I was just say, like, do you really think that the art wasn't as good?
But that's like the inherent paradox, right? And that's why I love it. I mean, technically, right? Technically, there were probably better people working in like 3D or or generative arts, or most of the people kind of on the fringe that had the opportunity to explore this probably were not the people commissioned by the big studios or already had a burgeoning digital art career. Those were people that got called in.
But that's outside of the bounds of like quality, right? When I think of like quality and I think of like early artists, and I'm just going off the top of my head, so of course this is not going to be a comprehensive list. It's really just people that I have just been like writing about over the last 2 days. But like I think about like Miss Al Simpson, incredible style, right? Very mature style in 2018, 2019 already. Like Matt Cain, Hackatow, X copies, right? There's a reason the early artworks of these people are still so sought after, right? It's not like they have changed indelibly towards the positive end of the spectrum. Even like the early
those are exemplars to kind of the rule.
Of course, but the early crypto art had 150 artists as opposed to thousands of artists. So the early exemplars were still a much larger population, a much larger percentage of the total whole than it was than now, right? And not to say that there's not an equally large percentage of exemplary artists, but it was just that like there was all these exemplary artists and there was not a financial incentive necessarily inherent there for them to be exemplary. They were just exemplary.
And I mean, we have to kind of really be careful about talking about exemplary art,
of course.
Because, it's just I'm talking more more technical.
Well, the technological part of it just wasn't there, right? I mean, if we're talking about long form generative art, like art blocks pioneered that in 2021, so anything before that was not going to be done with this most powerful of engines. And AI art, right, all the GANs that like Bard Janssen and Shortcut were using, like that stuff was there, but it obviously wasn't like Stable Diffusion hadn't come out yet. So the most powerful version of the technology hadn't existed yet. I would bet that if we just ported, I mean, maybe it's a completely inane thought experiment, but if we just ported that part of crypto art onto today's technology that just exists freely, there wouldn't really be a huge gap in quality just because they weren't being financially incentivized. I mean, Botto is financially incentivized. It's like one of the only projects that can consistently make funds, but it's not like I look at a Botto artwork and I say, oh, that's so much better than it was 3 years ago, or it's so much better than, you know, Mario Klingemann's work on his own, or it's so much better than things that were coming out a couple years ago.
You know, yeah. I think everything is being trimmed to the bone, right? And now we really need to step back as humanity and ask ourselves, what needs to exist? What needs to exist? There is pressure being put on the individual from all sides, and it is beginning. We are beginning to see cracks in the facades, just globally. It's not working for people, right? And the U.S. is going to be last to experience it, but you know, something here has got to give.
But I return to the understanding that, like, or my assertion that an art movement does not need a financial incentive, because the incentive can be, the incentive can be like, artists are going to create artwork regardless of financial incentive. I write silly fiction every single day, not because there's financial incentive affixed to it, because I kind of have to, I'm compelled to. And I do think that's the case for a lot of people who make art, and especially a lot of crypto artists, right? People just share stuff all over the place in crypto art without any expectation of immediate financial incentive. And I think that one of the, I mean, I would hope that you agree with me on this, because you founded an entire platform fundamentally founded on the fact that people wanted to just make, share, and collect each other's art for free, which is 01. So I think that, like, this world is already kind of trimmed back to its bones in the sense of, like, free mints and such, right? That is the core of 01. It's the core of Zora. It's the core of Base, at least the NFT side of Base. It's basically the core of Tezos, where, you know, you can collect things for a lot of money, but most stuff that you see and collect on Tezos, you're paying literally like United States pennies for artwork that you like. And I think that that is really indicative of the fact that maybe the reality of crypto art has for a long time already internalized the kind of future fears that I am kind of just now seeing. That most of crypto art has already made its peace with the fact that there's not a financial incentive, that there's not really a pathway towards financial freedom in the way that I think many artists believe there was in 2021, 2022. It's been a dismal bear market for 2 years. It seems like all of these art-focused platforms are basically operating under the same assumption that there is something else that is encouraging us to create and share and collect that's not a financial incentive.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to see where it's progressing. I would almost push back and say there's a hyper financialization. I didn't see exactly what the Zora update was today. There was some partnership with Uniswap that
I didn't see anything
that makes it appear like they are trying to get like artists as liquid as, you know, like a crypto token, and kind of just throwing all the art together and saying, like, you know, just buy kind of the same unit. I didn't really see that, but that seems to be kind of where they're going with that. Is that, like, you know, all the art is the same, and which is so funny because that's so it's so the opposite of what an NFT actually is. Right? A non-fungible token. Now you begin to look at token standards like 721, where each is like uniquely editioned and numbered, or 1155, where really everything is kind of just like a fractionalized piece of the whole. And it kind of seems like, you know, we want to slide down this curve for where, like, the art object is no longer the standalone art object, but everything just kind of becomes fungible.
Can I actually just stop you for a second? So I saw you going back and forth on Twitter with, I believe it was Mighty Moose, about the difference between ERC 721 and the ERC, what was it, 1155?
Yeah.
What is the actual, like, technical difference between those two things?
So 721 is numbered editions. right? So we did 721 on 01, and we did that intentionally because, you know, if you collect the first edition, that is your edition. Somebody's going to collect the second, third, fourth, fifth, on and on and on, right? And those are separate, distinct editions, as in like a signed numbered print, right? Sure. 1155, there is no difference between, say, the token that you hold and the token that I hold, right? So effectively, it becomes flat in that it's not a print. It's more, it can be kind of thought as either like a duplicate copy, a perfectly duplicated copy, or like a fractionalized version of the one true copy.
Interesting. And so what's the bet on this, that people are just going to want to like basically like gamify the collection of art as they do with meme coins?
Right. Haven't we kind of seen like we saw this slide with PFP projects where all the PFP projects were launching their token, right? And kind of like drawing out or creating a lower frictionless barrier to entry if people want to participate in this community. And I think that's probably, you know, tiered asset classes to kind of engage in capturing cultural value.
Mm-hmm. Well, it begs the interesting question, which is like, if there is no financial incentive to creating art, is there still a hope of like capturing broader cultural incentive, or capturing broader cultural intention, and that being its own incentive?
Look, I think the people that are going to win are either the people who command the, you know, the 1%, the top dollars, and are doing the one of ones, or the people that are hyper focused on distribution, right? And getting just as much out there, as ubiquitous as possible. That's obviously, I think, how Xcopy really came to hold his position in the market, was the fact that he had all of these one of ones on super rare, and then he had this layer of editions on known origin. And then he went and released the Nifty Gateway Open Edition, right? Mm-hmm. And he did 5,000 of those. And suddenly there is kind of a place for everybody at every level to begin to get their own Xcopy. And that is like a solidified individual economics. Now, and then of course, right, went to base and minted 1 million of those flies. Mm-hmm. So
Mutatio.
Yeah, Mutatio. So, you know, my whole thing is that all of these, as an artist, if royalties are insured, right, which is still for me like a fundamental tenet, and I have no idea how anybody else is going to enforce royalties on a permissionless network, right? I think you really need like a blockchain for creators that ensures royalties, because then these pieces should all be in conversation with each other, right? Mm-hmm. If an Xcopy one of one sells for 200 ETH, well, then maybe, you know, a bunch of the lower pieces get repriced and valued up. And if it sells for higher at the top, then the pieces, and for that artist, that churn, when royalties are insured, is going to be the steady stream of income that they need.
Mm-hmm. I mean, do you think that like royalties coming back in a substantial way, or being insured in a substantial way, is realistic? Especially like, because I think that platforms in general are probably all going to be going away sooner rather than later. Like
I mean, I personally really think that creators should demand it, right? There seems to be no consideration. There seems to be a general.
Who do you demand it from? Right? Do you demand it from the Ethereum Foundation? Do you demand it from?
Well, you can't. The problem is, and this is why, you know, we went and built it, is that it has to be on a permissioned ecosystem, right? The rules of the ecosystem have to be built and designed for the creatives on that ecosystem, right? Ethereum can never guarantee royalties because it's permissionless. So somebody can come along and frankly, even on a permissioned ecosystem, you know, we're not going to tell you you can't transfer your NFT to a new wallet address.
Yeah.
Right. Yes. But the idea is that you make the friction and thresholds high enough so that people would be more inclined just to pay whatever it is.
Mm-hmm. I guess it just doesn't seem likely, I suppose, right? Like, especially I know for a fact that so many of these larger blockchains are working on fast, easy, quick bridges, right? There are already so many examples of this, whether it's AVAX being able to move things pretty easily throughout like all of their subnets, whether it's like Cosmos has the inter token bridge, the IBC, which is like you basically just move tokens from one blockchain to another. But it seems like there is within the race to interoperability that I think a lot of blockchains are focused on, is the idea that you will be able to move things across blockchains super easily. So why would there be especially if we're talking about, to use your example, an Xcopy 1 selling for $200,000?
Yeah.
Why then there's a $20,000 incentive to bridge your token one way or another to a blockchain where you don't have to pay royalties. Like,
well, there's a reason I'm not building there.
Fair enough. It just seems like the better the tech gets, the harder it is to enforce anything. And this is why I think that like there is a kind of strength in free mints where you are basically giving up on the idea of a financial incentive for the sake of name recognition, for the sake of cultural capital, for the sake of like, I don't know, public awareness, and using that as a gateway to like some kind of radical abundance where like, okay, now you're known, now you're a known quantity, now you have this like network of people. What do you do from there? I mean, that's been the business model du jour for content basically for the last 4 years, right? As all of these larger magazines shut down, as the Sports Illustrated and the Pitchforks shut down, like these writers are starting Substacks, and with their Substacks, they can leverage their own, brand recognition, their own cultural capital into an income stream that just comes from personal relationship with the individual themselves. Like,
I mean, the whole grail of crypto is that everything is tokenized, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everything is liquid, and that includes people, right? So, you want, and this is what FriendTag, this is what BitClout, this is what all of these people are trying to do. They have totally the wrong incentive structure. But this is kind of like the holy grail and the thing that everybody is pushing towards, right? All memes, all people, all assets, right? Totally frictionless tokenized world in which everything is cross-chain and capital is moving freely between it all.
I guess my thinking is that seems like a somewhat of an inevitability, right? Like it just does not seem like, from everything I've seen, it doesn't seem like crypto art the way it is sustainable, right? The businesses aren't sustainable. The high prices aren't sustainable, unless you are doing a redo of 2021 where you just have so much speculation coming in. But I don't think that actually benefits anybody. It benefits a few people in the short term, but it doesn't benefit people in the long term. So it seems like the way that this goes is artists aiming for like this radical abundance idea where you're just trying to segue your name into as many people's, consciousnesses as possible. And that form of crypto art, or in that form of just cultural capital in general, feels a lot more sustainable to me because it's harder to exploit, right? It's really easy for a large collector in the current model we have to spend a lot of money on an artist and turn that artist into a star system for the sake of increasing their investment. But if an artist themselves are just angling to get into the, again, consciousnesses of as many people as possible, it's a lot harder for these outside actors to insinuate themselves into that cycle and control it, because the person themselves would have all that power. I think a great example of this is Taylor Swift, who like re-recorded all of her music so as to devalue the masters of her early work that were all bought by the manager Scooter Braun. And in doing so, leveraging this, incredible cultural capital, she was basically able to take back the entire like financial structure of her whole catalog.
I mean, liquid markets are efficient, right? We can go and look at anybody's super rare profile from, 2021. And you're going to ask yourself, are these prices real? Do they actually represent the value if there haven't been sales in 2 years? And, so what is the value? You really don't know. But Bitcoin, we know what the price of a Bitcoin is, right? And that is a highly efficient, heavy, what is this, 42 billion traded in the last 24 hours. You know, like you know that's the price because it's efficient and frictionless.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, and then what was it? You know, 1 million tokens were launched on Solana in the last month, right? So we are getting up there. The problem is that all of this is going to be run by autonomous agents, right? And they will be deploying capital on behalf of people into all sorts. And then the question really does become, what is valuable?
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess, and I think this is my ultimate point, is that if we are once again asking ourselves, like, what is valuable and what is the value of any of this, that does seem to hew closer to the core of what crypto art was at its beginning, when there was not at least again, from what I understand, because I was not there, when there was a lack of clarity about what was valuable, what should have value, what had intrinsic value, what had cultural value. These things were still being kind of like, I don't know, combated in the public marketplace, so to speak. I just guess I don't see that I don't see a return to that as so negative, especially because I know that whatever we have now, whatever this thing now, that this crypto art facsimile, where, like it or not, agree with it or not, there is value in very clearly delineated places. They're not where I want there to be value, but there's value in a couple of artists who have large, followings, who have relationships with certain collectors, who have relationships with auction houses, like trad art auction houses. That's where the value is. That's where the one denomination of value is, which is financial value.
To some extent, up here, right?
Yeah, exactly. The 1% of the 1%. I don't think it's a negative. I think there's a silver lining too. And I guess this is, like, again, the reason why I wanted to bring this whole topic up, which is, like, let's say markets all crash, right? And crypto, because of its new allegiance to just general, it's new, like, lockstep movement with just markets, global markets as a whole. Like, if we get rid of all of the financialization, not because we want to, but because we're forced to, because there is no money in this anymore, not for the 1%, not for the 1% of the 1%, not for anybody, because there's simply, like, no money to go around. Doesn't that new shape feel a lot more genuine? Doesn't it feel a lot more exciting? Doesn't it feel a lot more interesting than whatever this is now, where you have, a shape that nobody likes, but everyone recognizes?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's no way at this point that anybody is going to break into here if they don't master down here, right? That's what all of the world has become, right? It has really become, how far can you distribute, right? And if you have a stranglehold, or you have a bunch of people that are behind you and want to support you, even if it starts free, the broader your distribution network is what is going to propel you to have value. And these two things in communication, I would be really curious, for example, what would happen if somebody like Beeple, released a 24-hour free open edition, right? How many does that mint? And then, then the question is, like, does that increase? I can't understand for the life of me why people say that would dilute the value of a one-of-one piece.
Well, why do you think it would dilute the value? Why do you think people say it would dilute the value of a one-of-one piece?
Because the art market is built on the perception of scarcity, and there's just this pre-existing notion that I think is non-applicable here.
Well, I'll just jump in and say I think that further, the art market is built on a tension between, like, ubiquity and scarcity, right? Just scarcity is nothing, and just ubiquity is nothing. You need that tension between the two things. So there is, like, I don't know if anybody knows it, but there is some kind of algorithmic, like, formula between how much ubiquity you need and how much scarcity of purchasable assets you need, that I think leads to high prices. And I think people have been trying to game that system forever, and maybe nobody has really figured it out. But I also, like, I don't know if I mean, just taking the Beeple example, like, I don't know if it matters. I don't think Beeple cares about money anymore. I think he made enough of it on his $70 million sale, and there's no need to ever tokenize something again, which is basically
That could
like,
be, yeah.
but that ecosystem, right? The just Beeple ecosystem and the, you know, potential future ecosystem of zero financial incentive are basically the same. In both of these cases, there's zero future financial incentive. Beeple doesn't create a work every day because he is making money off of it. Like, he just does it because he clearly wants to. People could just disappear and live his life in perfect harmony, super happy and super wealthy, and probably just fuck off to an island somewhere. And he would be perfectly fine. I think that, again, there is an incentive for the man to share art, whether that's to, you know, raise his global profile or simply because he wants to create. He likes to create an artwork every day and will continue to do that. I'm not sure what his incentive is, but it's a non-financial incentive, clearly.
Yeah, I mean, look, people need purpose, right? And that is kind of, I think, what is at the core of all of this. Is there is a bit of a global existential crisis that is removing people's purpose, right? So you kind of go back and think about what triggered all of this almost to begin with was COVID.
Yes.
So people were looking for something because suddenly they didn't have to like wake up, brush their teeth, take a shower, go to work. Right. So there is an inherent need to connect with something deeper than oneself. Right. Everybody always talks about like making a bunch of money and fucking off. And then what?
Yeah, but that's exactly my point, is that when you break crypto art down to its basest elements, right, it is just a bunch of people existing in a common space who want to share their art with each other, right? Incentives aside, that is what the thing is, right? It is on Twitter, but it could be anywhere. But the larger like social media structure of this thing has created a very specific kind of town commons between a very small community that has a very limited overlap in terms of their interests, but it's a very strong and powerful overlap in a very central interest. And I think that thing is really, really ardent, right? It will not die with an art market because it does not rely on sales to sustain itself, because and we know that because it was born out of a situation in which there were no sales to sustain itself. It was sharing, it was creating, it was admiring, it was forming relationships. Like you want to call that, if anyone wants to call me naive, that's fine, but that's what the movement was at its very beginning. And then once the money came in, the incentive structure completely changed. It built itself atop what was already there, but all of these, like, I think very pretty flowery motivations still remain under the surface. And again, I think the proof is in the pudding. The proof is in the 0-1. The proof is in the Tezos ecosystem. The proof is in just like all the work that you see just people throw up on Twitter, not that they're minting, but just like photos they've taken, or, you know, a 3D model that they're working on. So, you know, they can get 16 likes and people can say, wow, how did you do this? Show me, you know, how you did this in Blender. Like, that's what the core of this is just like, I have a passion. I must do it. I'm looking for a purpose. And I have found here in this weird commons, other people who have a similar purpose, who want to like intertwine our purposes. Yeah. And I think that you take all the financial incentives away, whether through force or through like, I don't know, through, you know, the sheer length of economic punishment, and you're left with this, I think, really pure thing. I mean, I think that like we are in a situation in which we've been in a stagnant crypto art for quite a while, and we either like wait this out and everything dies, and then we're left with this core, this like smoldering core, or there's this really, you know, terrible economic downturn and it washes everything away real quick in a single flood, and then we're still left with the same core. And I think that excites me in a way which I think may be a little bit improper, I suppose. Like I'm curious to see if this movement, because I can't for the life of me envision a world in which this doesn't remain in some form, in which people, like, we all follow each other on Twitter already. Like, that doesn't change even if the markets die out, and like people will just be sharing things, and that just is exciting to me. I don't know. Maybe
I mean, I have a, you know, just reflecting on it. It's almost been a year of 0-1. I've created almost 200 works that I've shared. I've distributed almost 8,000 NFTs. It might seem like a lot, but I want that number to be 1 million, right? I want it to be 10 million. I want it to be 100 million. Like, I really don't care. It's just exciting that a little piece of me, has left and it's gone to somebody else. And that has touched them through like just a couple mouse clicks or something on the phone or whatever. That in of itself is valuable. It's like a touch point. It feels exponential. It feels like I am being empowered to share in a way that like a like doesn't, right? A like is owned by the platform, but here you are literally like putting yourself into something and you are sending it out, and people are, for lack of a better term, they're fucking with it. Like they dig it. And that is really purposeful, because I never would have considered that I would have spent whatever it is, 200 days just creating something. And I don't care what it is. I don't care how long it takes. But it is nice, and you do grow through it. Now, I just think that is what we kind of just need to come back to.
I agree with you. I think that what you're describing is something that I know very well. I think it's probably pretty universal to a lot of artists. And I think we have to get back to it. Not like we have to, like we must, but like we are going to be left with no choice but to get back to it, because there is really no way things improve within crypto art, in the sense that I think people optimistically, maybe even like naively, want it to, right? Because you don't want a repeat of 2021, because that just further like calcifies a really fucked up kind of value system. The only way that the thing remains pure is if it like is broken down to its bones.
And kind of the inverse of this is, in an emergent world of AI, we will continue to be fed tailor perfect content, right? So the thing that we are thinking is the thing that we will be receiving. And for me, that's really scary, because it almost strips away the magic of kind of the randomness. And it strips away the magic of interacting with somebody else's creation and their magic. And, when everything is so fine-tuned to you, I think a lot of the problem already is that capitalism has focused so heavily on the individual that maybe there is like a collective narcissistic personality disorder. Right. And maybe the way to really integrate is to just all kind of, I don't know, get out of ourselves and just become all each other.
Sounds very, I don't know, it sounds very gothic horror in a certain sense. Very like Eldritch horror.
I'll send it to Cronenberg.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that only happens. Like, I do think you still need to acquiesce to whatever, like this, I don't know, this kind of like generalized idea of AI. You have to still acquiesce to it, right? You still have to click yes on the permission box of, I want all of my likes. I want all the things I like presented to me.
Your data is already done.
No, not that. But I mean, like, I still have an opportunity to choose, even on fucking Twitter, between my For You page and the people I follow, right? And like, there is a difference between those two things. When I click on my For You page, I see the things that the algorithm knows that I like, and the things that I'm attracted to. When I hit my, following page, I see crypto art, and I see, things that I'm not necessarily seeking out outside of like this one small sphere, but like they are very different. And as long as you have a choice between those two things, you have an opportunity to still expose yourself to things that surprise you and that you don't know you like and that challenge you. And I think you still have to like say, yes, I want that version of the world, right? Even if, let's say 2,000 people who are engaged in crypto art need to flee to a fucking Telegram chat or to some other app that hasn't existed yet, so they could be together without all of the fluff and bullshit of algorithmically generated, AI generated, like internet experience. Like, I think that they will do that because I think, again, like the core of this thing is stickier than it just like it's not like crypto is not a content mill. Even though sometimes I think it could feel like that, like it is still individual artists who are creating things for a whole host of reasons, some wonderful, some philosophical, some inane, and some just like momentary inspirations. But like, as long as there are a collection of people like that who have that same aim and who are aware of each other, in at least in a general sense, like it can continue, I guess is my point. And I do think that like, again, the crux of this whole podcast is I think if you open your eyes a little bit, if I open my eyes a little bit and I look at 0 and I look at all these different blockchains, I look at Tezos and I look at all these free mints and I look at basically like the entire composition of my crypto art experience today from a little bit of a different angle, I can see that maybe that thing is already like people have already gone home to that place en masse, even though I'm not necessarily paying attention to it.
You know, I'll just say it's kind of, well, there's a lot of things going on, but there's, you know, Adobe estimates 300 million to 500 million creators, right? Global creators, people that are taking the time just creating. And yet there's just thousands of people in this little niche that understands the power of authentication and provenance. So I truly believe if we are not focused on growing the bottom, and if artists aren't focused on distributing their work to more people, then none of this grows. And it kind of just, it, you know, I think it risks just going away into irrelevance. And then I think down the line, somebody is going to probably figure out how to like tokenize people better. And then everything just, you're just flat. It's just flat. And there is no art, there is no beauty. And you know, if that happens, then probably these relics also get valued upwards. But otherwise, you know, if you haven't created any of those relics, if you haven't created any relative scarcity around yourself, then you're just put on like your flat token curve.
How do you think a Coborn token would do?
I don't care. I don't know. It probably hopefully better than the MOCA token.
Ooh, good answer.
Yeah.
Let's wrap things up here. I think this was honestly a pretty dour topic, but I think this was a fairly optimistic podcast. It felt that way to me. Maybe I'm totally off my rocker here.
I don't know, man. It is always interesting to just come together and try and project where we're going.
I will find an optimistic angle for where crypto art is going. I don't know. Maybe it's not this week on the podcast, but if we keep doing this week after week after week, there's another chance to try again.
Yeah.
Well, as we get out of here, I do want to just thank Russ, Frankie, and Blackstar who are hanging out in our chat with us. I'm sorry we didn't get to your wonderful thoughts, but I've been reading them this whole time, and I really appreciate
thanks,
being here.
Blackstar. That was cool.
Coborn, I appreciate you being here. I appreciate Akuchi on your lap being here. I appreciate everyone listening and watching. If you liked what you heard, please give us a rating, a 5-star rating preferably, or a like or a subscribe or whatever on Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcast. Feel free to collect this or any other episode of MOCA Live on Zora for free. Please give us a free subscribe to our Substack channel at museumofcrypto.substack.com. Had a column go out just about an hour and a half ago on a very similar topic. Would love your thoughts. And that'll do it for us this week. We'll be back next week with another MOCA Live podcast episode. Coborn, any last thoughts?
Left it all on the table.
There it goes. All right. We appreciate you being here, and we will see you all real soon. Bye.